Picture this. It's 1967 in China, and we are in the absolute dead center of the Cultural Revolution. There's a 15-year-old girl standing on the rooftop of a university building.
Right in the thick of the chaos.
Exactly. And she's waving this massive, giant red flag. She is completely just intoxicated by revolutionary fervor.
Oh, slowly bought into it.
Yeah. She looks out at this chaotic crowd below, and she genuinely believes that the sheer burning passion in her blood is going to birth a perfect world from the ashes of the old one, and then she is shot right out of the sky.
Wow. Just like that.
Just like that. Her body falls, light as a bird, and she gets impaled on the sharp iron gates of the courtyard below. And the crowd, they don't gasp, they don't mourn her, they actually just use her lifeless body for target practice.
It is such an unflinching, brutally stark image to open with. It sets a tone that immediately strips away any romanticism you might have about revolution.
It really does. And it forces you to ask a massive, terrifying question right out of the gate. Like, what actually happens to a society when ideological madness completely overrides human reason, empathy, and, well, scientific truth?
Right. And that's exactly what we're looking at today.
Yep. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack the chilling opening chapters of Liu Cixin's award-winning sci-fi novel, The Three-Body Problem. Now, if you know the book, you know it eventually goes to the stars.
Right, it gets very cosmic.
Very cosmic. But today, we aren't talking about aliens. We are keeping our feet firmly on the ground. We're focusing on the historical reality of the Cultural Revolution as it's presented in the text. We're exploring the tragic clash between radical ideology and scientific development and examining how this intense, suffocating social pressure fundamentally transformed the trajectory of the main character, Ye Wenjie.
And before we get into the mechanics of that transformation, just a quick caveat to you, the listener. Because we are exploring highly charged historical and political themes from 1960s China, we want to be incredibly clear here. Our goal is not to take any political sides or endorse any specific viewpoints.
Absolutely not.
Right. We're purely here to impartially explore the historical atmosphere and the ideological concepts exactly as they are constructed by the author in the book.
Yeah, we are just following the narrative blueprint. So, to understand how a young 15-year-old girl could be killed so brutally and how a society reached that absolute boiling point, we have to look at the historical atmosphere.
It's a very specific environment.
It is. Liu Cixin paints this incredibly vivid picture of 1960s China, where universities, which are universally understood to be these sanctuaries of learning and reason, they are transformed into literal bloody battlegrounds.
Yeah, the chronological descent into chaos at Tsinghua University is, well, it really stands out in the text. It operates as a perfect microcosm for the broader societal collapse.
Let's talk about that scene at Tsinghua.
Right, so you have various factions of Red Guards who've turned on each other, and the conflict just escalates so rapidly. What starts as ideological debates devolves into physical violence and eventually full-scale warfare.
And using a bizarre, almost surreal mix of weaponry, right?
Yeah, exactly. You've got modern, stolen military rifles being fired right alongside students wielding old Chinese broadswords and spears.
It's a literal, physical clash of modernity and history happening right in the courtyards of higher education. It's wild. But the crossfire between the student factions isn't even the darkest part.
No, not at all.
The real horror is the systematic, targeted social pressure applied to the intellectuals. The book details the reality of these struggle sessions.
The struggle sessions, yeah. Those are hard to read.
They really are. They're these massive public rallies designed explicitly to humiliate, break, and physically assault anyone deemed a class enemy or a reactionary academic. And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale of this violence, the author notes that in just a 40-day period in Beijing alone, over 1,700 victims were beaten to death during these sessions.
Wow. Over 1,740 days. That's staggering. And the physical violence, as horrific as it is, was really only one layer of the oppression.
What do you mean?
Well, the more insidious mechanism at play was the psychological breaking of these brilliant minds. They were branded with this derogatory term, monsters and demons. The whole system was essentially designed to dismantle a human being's grasp on objective reality.
Okay, let's unpack this because it's fascinating in a very dark way. It reminds me of sensory deprivation. Have you ever read about that?
A little bit, yeah.
If you lock a human being in a pitch black room for long enough, their brain will eventually start hallucinating flashes of light just to keep functioning. The environment forces the brain to betray itself. And these struggle sessions seem designed to strip away all objective reality and replace it with so much pain and repetition that the victims' brains eventually, hallucinate guilt just to make the torture make sense.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
And it maps directly onto the 3 distinct stages of psychological collapse that the author outlines for these intellectuals.
Okay, walk me through the stages. What's the first one?
The first stage is arrogant resistance.
Yeah.
I mean, these are brilliant scientists, historians, and writers. They know the facts. They know 2 + 2 is 4.
Right, you can't just tell a physicist gravity isn't real.
Exactly. So initially, they fight back and assert their intellect. But tragically, that is when they suffer the highest physical casualties. The mob responds to intellectual resistance with lethal force.
Which makes sense in a mob setting, sure. But I'm kind of struggling with the underlying logic of the state here. Why target the scientists and intellectuals first?
It seems backwards, right?
Totally backwards.
Right.
If you are a rising regime trying to build a global superpower, your most valuable assets are your physicists and engineers. You need them to build your infrastructure, your power grids, your weapons. Purging the smartest people in the room just feels entirely counterproductive to survival.
Well, it is counterproductive to technological survival. But absolute ideology prioritizes political conformity over practical progress.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about it. Science relies on objective, independent truth. It relies on a reality that exists completely outside of human political constructs.
So if a physicist can prove that gravity works a certain way,
Right, or that a particle behaves a certain way, regardless of what the chairman of the party says, that physicist possesses a truth that the state does not control.
and that independence is inherently threatening to a dogma that demands total ideological capture.
Exactly. The state cannot tolerate an alternative authority, even if that authority is just the laws of physics.
But human beings can't survive in a state of open, arrogant resistance against a lethal mob, so they have to adapt.
Which brings us to the second stage of the collapse. For those who survive the initial beatings, the mind builds a protective shell. They become numb, semi-conscious husks.
Like they're just on autopilot.
Exactly. They learn to walk through the unending struggle sessions half asleep, only waking up just enough to recite their supposed crimes mechanically, feeling absolutely nothing. It's an extreme form of dissociation just to endure the physical reality.
But the human brain can't stay in that numb, semi-conscious shell forever, right? I mean, eventually cognitive dissonance takes over. The brain has to rationalize the endless trauma.
And that triggers the horrifying final collapse. The endless repetition of political dogma, combined with the extreme physical suffering, finally shatters the rational mind completely.
They break.
They completely break. The victims actually start believing their own forced confessions. They genuinely internalize the idea that their scientific work somehow harmed the revolution, and they begin to weep in true, pathetic repentance. They basically delete their own intellect.
Wow. The ideological victory is complete at that point.
It is psychological annihilation. And to ensure we don't just view this as abstract history, Cixin zooms in on one specific event.
Right. We move from the macro mechanism of the university chaos into a highly specific, agonizing struggle session involving a physics professor named Ye Zhetai. This is where we see the physical and the intellectual torture perfectly, tragically aligned.
The imagery in this specific scene is incredibly potent. While other victims on the stage are forced to wear humiliating but relatively light bamboo dunce caps, Professor Ye is forced to wear a remarkably heavy steel hat, welded from thick rebar.
And there's a plate too, right?
Yeah, around his neck hangs this massive iron plate, ripped directly from a laboratory oven door. It has his name written on it with a giant red X crossed over it.
The physical weight of the iron is literally mirroring the ideological weight meant to crush him. But what really catches my attention is how specific the ideological attack on his science is. The Red Guards don't just call him a traitor.
No, they get very specific.
They attack him for teaching Einstein's theory of relativity. They brand relativity as the black flag of capitalism. And their logic, it's wild. Einstein went to America and helped the imperialists build the atom bomb. Therefore, the physics themselves are capitalist.
The guilt by association is astonishing, but it goes even deeper into the philosophical roots of science. They actually attack him for teaching quantum physics, specifically the Copenhagen interpretation.
Okay, let's pause there, because this is where the ideological leap gets really complex. Why does quantum mechanics offend the Red Guards? I mean, it's just math and particles.
Well, it comes down to Marxist philosophy, which is built on dialectical materialism.
Okay.
Materialism dictates that the physical world exists in a definitive, objective, solid state, regardless of human perception. It is what it is. But the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that the mere act of an external observer looking at a quantum system actually collapses the wave function. It suggests that observation alters reality.
Oh, wow. So to the Red Guards, this is heresy.
Complete heresy. They view it as reactionary idealism. It's the dangerous idea that the human mind or consciousness holds sway over material reality.
So they're literally forcing a political worldview onto subatomic particles. That is insane. They demand that Marxist philosophy must guide scientific experiments. But Ye Zhetai, standing there bleeding under this massive iron hat, he refuses to yield.
He does. He calmly argues the exact opposite.
He states that philosophy must be derived from experimental truth, not the other way around.
He even defends the Big Bang Theory, which the Red Guards furiously attack because the concept of time having a beginning leaves a blank, unexplained space.
And in their view, a blank space leaves room to be filled by a creator or a god, which violently contradicts their atheistic doctrine.
Right, but the thing is, Ye Zhetai doesn't argue for a god. He simply refuses to lie. He says science hasn't proven or disproven a creator. He defends the boundaries of what is empirically known.
But the debate isn't won with logic. It's ended by betrayal. His own wife, Shao stands up in the crowd. She's a fellow academic, but she's wearing this ill-fitting, forced military uniform, desperately trying to save herself.
Yeah, that part is so hard to read.
She completely denounces him. She twists this anecdote about Einstein visiting China in 1922, seeing a poor rock smasher who earned only 5 yen a day, and she uses this to claim that the, quote, gravity of reality is too strong for theoretical physics.
It is a profound, layered betrayal. She isn't just abandoning her husband. She's abandoning the shared reality of the scientific method they both dedicated their lives to.
And this ideological frenzy culminates in sheer, unrestrained brutality. 4 14-year-old female Red Guards, completely intoxicated by their perceived historical glory, whip Professor Ye to death right there on the stage,
using the heavy brass buckles of their military belts.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the mechanics of this scene, is this actually a debate about physics or just a performance of power?
Oh, it's purely a performance of power. The science itself was irrelevant to the Red Guards. Those 14-year-old girls don't understand the Copenhagen interpretation.
Obviously not.
By forcing a brilliant physicist to either verbally deny the immutable laws of the universe or suffer a violent death, the ideology proves its supreme dominance over reality itself. It's about forcing reality to bend to political dogma.
And he dies with his eyes open. The author describes Professor Ye's blood dripping off the platform, sounding like the rhythmic footsteps of someone walking away.
And watching every single second of this horror, trapped in the crowd, is his daughter, Ye Wenjie.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is the true pivot point of the narrative. We transition from the public murder of scientific truth to the deep, fundamental emotional trauma that fundamentally alters Ye Wenjie's soul.
Right. Her whole world breaks in that moment.
When her father is being beaten, she tries to scream. She tries to rush the stage, but 2 old janitors hold her back to save her life. Her voice is completely drowned out by the cheering mob. She is rendered utterly voiceless.
And the psychological fallout is immediate. When the crowd finally disperses and leaves the battered body behind, Ye Wenjie doesn't weep hysterically. The author describes her turning into a stone statue.
Just totally frozen.
Yeah. She walks up to her father, takes his cold hands, and silently places his pipe into his dead palm.
The profound inner loneliness of that moment is staggering. She has nowhere to go. As she walks home, she can hear her mother, the woman who just fed her father to the wolves, laughing hysterically through the window. She's clearly lost her own mind to the trauma.
Yeah, she can't go inside.
So Ye Wenjie goes to the only other sanctuary she knows, the home of her mentor, Professor Ruan.
Professor Ruan's home used to be a refuge for Ye Wenjie. It was this enclave of culture filled with European books, classical music, Turkish pipes. But when she arrives, she finds the sanctuary has been ransacked by the Red Guards.
And she finds Professor Ruan dead, having quietly taken sleeping pills.
But the detail that Liu Cixin includes here is so striking. Before she died, Professor Ruan had cleaned up the ransacked room as best she could, and she chose to die wearing a light-colored jacket, high heels, and lipstick.
Wow.
In a society that violently mandated grab, uniform, military-style clothing, choosing to die in high heels and lipstick was her final, silent act of defiance. an assertion of individual humanity against the revolution's mandated uniformity.
It was the only defiance left to her. And observing all of this, Ye Wenjie undergoes a permanent internal shift. The text uses an incredible metaphor here. She is described as being like a Geiger counter exposed to a lethal dose of radiation.
That analogy is so perfect.
I love it because it perfectly explains the mechanism of her trauma. When a Geiger counter is exposed to normal radiation, it clicks. But when it is exposed to an extreme, overwhelming blast, it doesn't just click faster, it maxes out, it goes to zero, it stops registering entirely.
That is exactly Ye Wenjie's internal state. She is completely numb. She doesn't scream to the heavens. She doesn't plot passionate revenge. Her trauma turns completely inward, creating this terrifying, absolute silence within her that basically severs her connection to the rest of humanity.
She becomes an island. And this brings us to the final phase of her transformation. 2 years later, Ye Wenjie's internal emotional isolation manifests as physical exile.
Right, she gets sent away.
She is sent to the frigid Greater Khingan Mountains with the Inner Mongolia Production and Construction Corps. And it is here that she witnesses the exact same ideological madness she saw at the university, but this time it is being weaponized against the natural world.
The environmental destruction is just visceral. You have these quote-unquote educated youth from the cities, completely detached from nature, who are put to work mindlessly clear-cutting ancient forests.
The author describes a 330-year-old larch tree, a living thing that was literally a sapling during the Ming Dynasty, being butchered in less than 10 minutes with a chainsaw. And the worker who does it, he feels absolutely nothing. He just sees it as an obstacle to progress.
The parallel is impossible to ignore. It is the exact same disregard for history, complexity, and life that the Red Guard showed for her father's intellect.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Ye Wenjie is assigned to clean the branches off these massive fallen trees. And as she runs her hands over the stripped wood, she imagines she is cleaning the scars and wounds on her dead father's body in the morgue. Her trauma is mapping itself directly onto the scarred landscape.
And right in the middle of this bleak, frozen wasteland, she crosses paths with a journalist named Bai Mulin, who secretly lends her a copy of Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring.
That book was huge.
Right. We already know the massive impact that book had on the Western environmental movement regarding the devastating effects of pesticides. But watching Ye Wenjie process it in this context is a brilliant cross-cultural revelation.
It triggers a monumental shift in her worldview. It's a massive aha moment for her. She looks at Carson's critique of capitalist chemical destruction in the West, and she maps it onto the communist chainsaw destruction of the forests in the East.
She realizes that the destruction of the environment is not a specific political failing. It is a fundamental species failing.
Exactly. They are both driven by the exact same destructive human nature. The environmental madness and the Cultural Revolution are two sides of the same coin.
And this leads to her ultimate philosophical conclusion. She realizes that human evil is systemic to our biology and our societal structures. She uses this really striking analogy. She compares humanity to an iceberg floating in the ocean.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, if the iceberg is made of the very water it floats in, it is trapped by its own composition. It cannot change its own nature. It's a devastating conclusion. Wenjie realizes that humanity cannot trigger its own moral awakening because the very tool we would use to elevate ourselves, our fundamental human nature, is the exact thing dragging us down. She says it's as physically impossible as grabbing your own hair and trying to lift yourself off the ground.
And that realization begs the ultimate question. If humanity is inherently destructive and entirely incapable of saving itself, who can save us?
Right. Who's left?
Ye Wenjie concludes that a moral awakening requires a force completely outside of the human race. This absolute, chilling loss of faith in humanity, born from the trauma of seeing her father beaten to death over quantum physics, and solidified by the mindless destruction of ancient forests, sets the stage for every monumental decision she makes in the rest of the story.
It is an incredibly heavy philosophical shift, but it brings us to the core, actionable takeaway of this deep dive. When you synthesize these chapters, the blueprint of societal collapse is terrifyingly clear. When ideological purity replaces objective truth, it doesn't just stop at rewriting textbooks or burning universities. It eventually destroys our fundamental connection to empathy, to each other, and to the natural world.
Yeah, Ye Wenjie's story isn't just a sci-fi origin story. It is a masterclass in how a society loses its grounding in reality.
And that leaves us with a final thought to really mull over. We look back at the historical accounts of the 1960s Red Guards, and we see obvious, terrifying madness. We wonder how millions of people could be so blind to their own destructive fervor.
But we have to ask ourselves, how many of our own modern, completely unquestioned societal assumptions or technological pursuits might be viewed by future generations as our own form of ideological blindness?
That's a great point. Are we entirely sure we aren't mindlessly clear-cutting our own ancient forests today, just flying a different banner of progress?
It really makes you wonder.
That is the kind of question that will keep you awake at night. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the unquestioned assumptions in the world around you. Relentlessly protect objective truth, and never forget the image of that 15-year-old girl on the roof so blinded by the flag she was waving that she couldn't see the iron gates waiting below. We will see you next time.